think I just did.
Okay. Oh, we're loading.
Yes.
Wow.
It's recording as well.
I'm going to grab my tea, wherever it is.
Okay.
But are we just going to be off? We're not going to be on, so.
So it's recording, just so you know. So every time people see this now, make sure Kate can hear.
Yes. So we're recording now, just so everyone knows. And Kate, Matt's going to introduce us. You can't hear him say that, but he's going to introduce us, and then we'll go off camera. So, so when you see Eddie and I go off, you go off.
I'll pass it to you, Kate, when I'm done, and then you can introduce yourself.
Okay.
Okay, so welcome. We already have quite a few attendees, which is great. I know it's helpful to get into the session a little early, so we're going to wait a couple minutes to get started.
Okay, I'm going to ask my fellow panelists. Am I not seeing chat because it's not?
You should be able to see it on the right.
It was.
You don't have that.
It was there and then it went away. So.
Okay, let me.
I can see chat.
Okay,
I can't see anything in the chat.
Yes, but so you might not have to monitor that since I am not seeing where I can see that.
Okay.
Strange.
Hi, Mark. I was wondering, I'm monitoring the chat box. Do you want to do questions at the end or throughout the presentation?
Yeah, I'd like to do questions throughout the presentation, and I can actually see the chat box while I'm talking because Eddie's going to be doing the presentation. So
okay.
I should be able to, thank you, Mark. I think I should be able to do this. We'll try our best.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Thank you. But if you see anything that I'm missing, please feel free.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone have any thoughts on why I'm seeing all your faces but not the presentation or the chat box? I must have gotten some strange view here.
I haven't pulled up the presentation yet.
Okay, but
yeah,
I can see the chat on the.
And is there somewhere you see where you can toggle on and off for the chat? Because I'm not seeing that. So.
Do you have a section where it says polls, attendees, Q&A?
No.
Okay. Do you have a section at the top, Stephanie, that says the session ends in blank time, stop broadcast? There's a little arrow there.
Mine says
upper right.
Mine says breakout session and stop broadcast. Yes, at the top.
Is there an arrow to the upper right?
There's
to the
a
right
small
of stop broadcast?
Arrow. Do you see the small arrow next to?
Okay, that was it.
Okay, so
Roberto says he can see us all and we're on.
Great. All right, thank you.
I do enjoy that these are being recorded, and the first few minutes of every session is going to be technical support for people. It's going to work. Yeah. So welcome. So it looks like we have a pretty good group, pretty good size group, of course, very good group. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. Let's see. Okay, so hello, my name is Matt Lakin. I am the acting air director here in EPA Region 9, and permanently I'm the deputy director. I go by he, him pronouns. I'm here today living and working on the traditional land of the Chukchan tribe of the Bay Miwok. I feel very honored to do so. I just want to, before I get started, I want to introduce some of my fellow panelists. I guess I'm giving the presentation, but they're panelists in the sense that they do all the actual work, and they'll be helping answer the questions, and we're very lucky. So I'm very lucky to have them. So Stephanie Valentine is our manager of our grants program and program integration office. That's the office that has our tribal coordinators. And so our two tribal coordinators are Eddie Holman and Kate Harper. So thank you to all three of them for joining today. Eddie's going to be doing the presentation. Thankfully, he's doing that so that I can actually monitor the chat. So thank you, Eddie, for doing that. And thank you all of you for joining. I'm used to giving a presentation where I stand up in front of people and wave my arms a lot, and it's very interactive, and that's definitely my preferred. This is a little different for me, so I'll be certainly trying my best. But to the extent that we can make it more interactive, if you want to go ahead and if there's something that strikes you at a slide, or you want to ask a question or add a perspective, I really encourage people to put things in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat as we go. Hopefully I can pause at certain points and respond to things that are there. So again, I really encourage you, you don't have to wait to the end. There will be time at the end, of course, if you choose to do that. And we'll try to make this as interactive as possible, even if you can't go on camera and actually verbally say your questions. Please, I encourage you to put things in the chat. So let's see. Yes, okay, next slide, Eddie. So today I'm going to talk about a few aspects of EPA's work with tribes on air quality. Certainly, as most of you know, we work with our state and local partners, our tribal partners, and our communities that we serve to really help educate and inform people about air quality issues. You'll hear that throughout the talk. For tribes in particular, I'm going to talk about how we provide technical support for air quality monitoring. We have 28 tribes that do air quality monitoring in our region, and I want to talk about that a bit. I will talk about EPA's efforts to issue permits on tribal land, and then I will, of course, touch on our grant programs related to tribes, both under a traditional Clean Air Act grant programs, and then the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act grants, and then some upcoming grants under the American Rescue Plan grant opportunities. And then what you'll hear throughout the talks is I really want to focus on opportunities for us to interact. Obviously, we have formal consultation, and then we have other ways where we could work with you to help understand and make better decisions. So you'll see that sprinkled throughout the talk. But again, that's something that's very important to us. And if there are points, first of all, if you see we're not doing something well, of course, please share. But if there's things that you want to engage on in terms of conversation about consultation or outreach or working together, I very much want to talk about that today. So next slide, Eddie. So I'm going to talk about 5 particular areas that I already mentioned. So planning is air quality planning. So I want to kind of describe what that means for us. And that's really the kind of the heart of our Clean Air Act regulatory program. I'll talk some about permits, as I mentioned, and monitoring, which I already mentioned. I will touch on indoor air quality. It's what we consider to be a non-regulatory program, but it's very important. People spend over 90% of their times indoors, and a lot of their exposures are in our homes, in our vehicles, other places that aren't outdoor air. And then like I said, I'll be touching on various aspects of our grant programs. So next slide. So just want to make sure it's, so this is a busy slide, and maybe if depends on how large you have it on your screen, whether or not you can see it, so I can describe some of this, but we have what we generally call air planning. And I mentioned this is the core of our regulatory program. So most of you know that nationally, EPA sets air quality standards. We call them National Ambient Air Quality Standards for 6 criteria pollutants. The most common pollutants you hear about are ozone or particulate matter. And there's 2 different categories of particulate matter that we often talk about. We talk about PM 2.5, which are the smallest particulate matter we regulate. So it's particulate matter that's of aerodynamic diameter less than 2.5 microns. So we call it PM 2.5. So you can think of it as small particles. And then we have more coarse particles, and that's called PM 10. So it's 10 microns or smaller. And that's more traditionally the bigger particles, coarse particles. You can think of it as, in say the arid Southwest, like where a lot of us live in Region 9. They're windblown dust is an example of PM10. There's other sources, of course, of PM10. So So air planning is essentially when EPA sets ambient air quality standards, we have to go through a process of deciding which areas are violating those air quality standards called designations. I'll talk about that in the next slide. And then once we determine which areas are violating, we declare those areas non-attainment. So what you see on the map here is everything in gray are areas that are non-attainment in our region. So, as unfortunately, especially in California, we have some of the worst air quality in the country. And so we have a lot of non-attainment areas, mostly for ozone and particulate matter. And so you'll also see in here that, many of our tribes, many of our tribal land is in non-attainment areas. And so that's going to be important in the next couple of slides I'll talk about, because that means there's a lot of implications. Certainly there's implications when state and local agencies put together plans. Their plans, are not their plans don't apply on tribal lands, but air quality doesn't just stop at the boundaries. And so, what our state and local agencies are doing to improve air quality will, of course, impact the tribes. And so, therefore, consultation is very important. And there are potential impacts. And then the tribes themselves are in non-attainment areas, and that has implications as well. So, so that's what this map shows. The one other thing I'll bring up on this map is their state and locals can put together plans. Those are called state implementation plans, or SIP. I try not to say that too much in this talk, but we say it all the time, SIP. So you'll see it on some slides, but it's state implementation plan. They'll do revisions to the SIP. There is really only one SIP, but they'll do SIP revisions or SIP submittals, and they'll. Sorry, I have to. It's covering up my chat. Just 1 second. I'm gonna take care of muting. Okay, so now I can see the chat still. I didn't want to lose the chat. State and locals will do plans, but also tribes can do plans, and those are called tribal implementation plans, or USEPA can do plans. So those are called federal implementation plans. So we'll talk about that a little bit, but not that much. But I just wanted you to have this terminology so that, when we're going out and doing actions and we're inviting tribes to consult, that you're at least familiar. Part of my goal is to make sure you're familiar with the terminology so that, if you do get communication from us, you kind of have a context for understanding that. So, so next slide, please. So I mentioned designations. So when EPA sets ambient air quality standards, it kicks off a process under the Clean Air Act to do designations. And what that is we have to decide which areas are violating the standard. If you're violating the standard and you're designated non-attainment, then there are some very prescriptive things that you have to do under the Clean Air Act. They're legally required, but they're also required by EPA regulations. And that's where you start, you have to come up with attainment plans, and you have to do other things. There's certain things you have to do for permitting, for example, and, in other parts of the act. So, so we go forward and we do designations, and EPA actually has a tribal designations policy that really informs how we work with tribes to communicate and consult on designations. That for some of you who aren't in non-attainment areas, this is really your first time some of you hear from us in terms of the regulatory process. And so, at that point, we go and we offer consultation to all tribes that are potentially impacted or, would have some information to inform the process. And so, that's a huge outreach anytime there's a new ambient air quality standard. And so we wanted you to be familiar with that. One of the things we do when we do designations is we actually classify the area of how severely they're violating the standard, and higher classifications have more stringent requirements. So you'll hear terms like marginal for ozone is the kind of the lowest classification. You're just barely over the standard. And then it goes up from there. It goes moderate, severe. There's two different types of severe, serious, and then extreme. And all of those are formal classifications under the Clean Air Act, and they all have different requirements. And so sometimes you'll also hear from us if your tribal land is in a non-attainment area, and we're changing the classification. We call that bumping up sometimes. So if an area, for example, is moderate non-attainment and we're going to reclassify them to severe or higher, it's just an example for ozone. then we will actually, again, inform tribes. This could have an impact from a regulatory perspective, but also, offer consultation. And again, that's really an important opportunity for tribes to participate in the regulatory process. So next slide, please. So that's it for now on planning. I want to touch on permits. Permits, generally EPA issues permits under the what's called the New Source Review Program. State and locals and some tribes also issue permits under this program. And the first part of the program is when it's a new source. Well, I guess it's called new source. But if it's a new source in an attaining area, then it's covered by what's called the Prevention of Significant Deterioration Program, PSD. And so there's actually, provisions on how to issue permits to new facilities, generally major sources. There's a definition of that. You have to be over a certain emissions limit, or major modifications to existing sources. And for those sources, they have to go through what's called the Prevention of Significant Deterioration. So the goal of that program is, of course, to keep an area attaining, not have it slip into non-attainment. There is also a program for sources that are in non-attainment areas, and that's called non-attainment NSR. And I guess it's pretty self-explanatory that that's what it is. Again, that's for major sources or major modifications in non-attainment areas. And then we also have a program called Tribal Minor NSR. So for minor sources, that don't reach those thresholds, they still do need permits. That's both in attainment and non-attainment areas. And I'll talk more about that in the next slide. I will mention one thing. The Tribal Nsr Rule, that was from 2011. So a lot of you have seen this talk over the years. If you're a returning person, I'm just going to give a little update on our more recent implementation of the Tribal Nsr Rule. But this has been around for some time. So next slide, please, Eddie. So again, I mentioned this rule applies to. Oh no, I didn't mention this first bullet. Sorry. It's for minor sources in tribal areas. Actually, it's for major and minor sources. But it applies to all tribally owned and non-tribally owned sources. So it's sources on tribal land. For minor sources, they may actually need to obtain a permit before construction. That has been a challenge. And so in general, if you're aware of sources, we encourage you to work with our permitting staff and help make sure they're aware so that we can provide support to the sources so that they're in compliance with that provision. One of the things that we've done in recent years, Cindy, good. I see you have it. This will be helpful. I'll get to your question in just a second. Thank you for putting it in the chat. One of the things we've done in recent years to help improve and streamline the process is we've come up with general permits for 11 source categories. So for those source categories, if a source can always apply for a source specific permit, but to make it easier, we have these what's called general permits. So if you're following the general permit, it will of course streamline the process and go more quickly, minimizing the burden. The 11 types of general permits that currently exist are hot mix asphalt plants, concrete batch plants, rock crushing facilities, gas stations, petroleum dry cleaners, auto body repair shops, engines, boilers, and sawmills. So those are the 11 sources. So again, our efforts, we continue to expand that list or, work on that, but our efforts are really to streamline permitting. Another thing that we've done is we have come up with in the past year, we've come up with a sample annual report for gas stations with permits. So again, to try to make it easier for sources to comply. Cindy's question, I'll read it out loud for those who can't see the chat. Again, I'm sorry, Cindy Smallwood's question. When you talk about non-attainment and violators, it's important to say that for many tribes in non-attainment areas, they're not violators. Actually, the bad air has been transported to and across their lands. That is very true. Tribes are the recipients of the bad air produced elsewhere and then have to deal with the consequences of being in non-attainment. I actually think that's an excellent point. Thank you. So in most cases, I would say tribes are the recipient of activity occurring outside of tribal lands. And, of course, air quality does not respect tribal boundaries, and especially for tribes in the San Joaquin Valley or South Coast, you're well aware of air quality being transported into your area. And I think it's a very good reason why you may want to be aware, certainly, of regulatory actions, but obviously be engaged in regulatory actions with EPA and through consultation. So thank you for making that excellent point. Dana's point in the chat is, could you speak to this announcement? It's EPA denied a petition for reconsideration for PSD and NSR. Unfortunately, I'm not off the top of my head. It's the emissions accounting rule. I'm going to have to, it's not something that I have a lot of expertise in. So Dana, I'm going to leave it in the chat and then see if we have anyone from our permits office that would like to offer a response to that. So we'll get back to that. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to delay an answer to your question in the chat. Sorry, Delbert, I don't know if I'm pronouncing your name right. What if the station remained, now new owners are taking over and they're required to do a NSR review application? So I think that is actually, I'm going to offer, let's see. Trying to think if we have a permitting staff person on. I know they're not on the attendee list, so they can't actually verbally answer.
Hey, Matt.
Yeah.
We do have some.
Lisa.
Yeah, we have Lisa Beckham on, but she's would have to respond by chat. So. Yeah,
Lisa. So I think this is Lisa Beckham is on, which is great. She's in our permits office and she is the lead for a lot of these issues. And so Lisa would say it way better than me. So Lisa, if you don't mind, yeah, that's great. Thank you for chiming in. If you don't mind, actually, to the extent that you're comfortable putting some answers in the chat, I think that would be very helpful. It'd be way more accurate coming from you than from me. So I'd prefer accurate answers. And then if there's anything that I can bring up or verbalize for those who can't see the chat, I'll do so. Okay, so I'm going to let that go. Lisa can handle that while I continue, if that's okay. So, so next slide. A little bit more on, so this is the progress in the last year on tribal NSR. So again, one of the things that we try to do, and by we, I really mean Lisa and others in our permits office, so that's great that she's here, is we really like to work with permit applicants in the development of permit applications. So, we're not trying to catch people and not, we're really trying to provide compliance assistance. We're trying to make sure that people are aware of the requirements. The other thing that like I said, I'll mention throughout is and I'll certainly mention at the end, we'll talk about consultation. We have done a lot to improve our consultation process. We have received some valid criticism in the past about how we engage or did not engage. And one of the things we're doing now is we are providing draft permits to tribes prior to the public comment period. So providing additional opportunities as part of consultation, informally or formally. In the last year, I did mention general permits. We have issued one general permit and 2 minor new source review permits and 1 administrative amendment. So we have had some activity, but the thing at the bottom here is very true. We have many more things in the pipeline. So expect next year next time we meet, we'll be talking a lot more about things that have been issued. So next slide, Eddie. So I'm going to switch to air monitoring. And I certainly appreciate that Lisa continues to answer in the chat, which is helpful. So air monitoring, I do know a little bit more about air monitoring. So since I previously managed this group. One of the things we want to do is just make sure that people know that there are resources available. Certainly, in our own air quality analysis office, that's our office that houses our monitoring staff. We do work with the 28 tribes that do ambient air quality monitoring. If you ever have any questions, we do have those contacts in the last slide, and we can share those in other ways as well. There are other resources available. there's something we call the TAM Center. That's the Tribal Air Monitoring Support Center. They're a great resource in terms of they provide training courses, for example, on monitoring. They also have loaner equipment for ambient air monitoring. The co-directors of the TAM Center are Christopher Lee and Hayden Hardy. So we can provide those contact information, of course. And then, EPA itself, we do offer, we are revising what's called our Air Pollution Training Institute, APTI, some people have known it as. We are revising the training courses online, including for monitoring, but really for all different areas. And some of those training courses are really meant to be introductory training courses. Some of the more sophisticated courses are offered by the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals, ITEP. They do provide regular training, including for monitoring. So ITEP is a great resource. I think most of you are familiar with ITEP in monitoring or other contexts. So just want to offer those as resources. The next slide, please, Eddie. So one of the things I mentioned is we do have 28 tribes in Region 9 that do monitoring. We consider there's two different kind of categories of monitoring, what we call informal monitoring or informational monitoring, or regulatory monitoring. So just to be clear, in Region 9, only 4 tribes do regulatory monitoring. It's Gila River, Salt River, Morongo, and Pechanga. The rest of whether if you're in the audience or otherwise, the rest of you are what we consider to be informational monitoring. Really, the distinction here is there are fairly strict and resource-intensive requirements for regulatory monitoring, but it doesn't mean informational monitoring is bad or poor quality. It just means that it hasn't met all the very strict regulatory requirements that EPA has put forward based on the statute. So informational monitoring has many, many uses. If you just need to understand your air quality, usually it's a complement or supplement to other monitoring information that exists in surrounding areas, sometimes by state and local agencies, sometimes by federal agencies. So it can be very useful for informing the public. One of the biggest uses of informational monitoring that many of you are probably aware of is for wildfire smoke. We've been impacted, especially in the last 5 years, by the most severe wildfires in history, and wildfire smoke persists over many weeks, and there actually can be huge fluctuations both in time. It can be relatively clear, and in 10 minutes later it could be at unhealthy levels, and also spatially. So because of all the topography, especially in the Southwest, with the Sierras and coastal mountain ranges, you can actually have huge gradients where you have wildfire smoke that's really bad, for example, at my house, and not very bad a mile away. And so sometimes it is very useful to have additional monitoring that can help inform public health decisions. So if you do if you are supported by EPA for this informational type monitoring, you are required under grant conditions to produce quality assurance project plans. So there are still some burdens that's from a grant perspective. Regulatory monitoring, this is really the monitoring that we use for attainment determinations. That's the main use. If an area is designated non-attainment, or if it's going to be designated to attainment, then we have to rely on regulatory monitoring. Because of that, there are many different regulatory requirements that you have to meet. And so in general, I think most people don't need to do regulatory monitoring. There's not a lot of reasons to do it, but if you are interested, of course, then please talk with our monitoring staff or myself or any of the tribal coordinators in this call. So it's actually, I'm going to talk more about that in the next slide, but the one thing I'll mention is the regulatory monitoring also requires implementation of audit programs. So we actually have to have people go out and audit every monitoring site on a regular schedule, and then EPA itself, we have to do what's called technical system audits. So again, it's very resource intensive for the tribes and for EPA, but there are reasons to do it from a attainment or non-attainment perspective. So next slide. Part of the reason why I focus on this just pretty much repeats what I just said, so I guess I jumped ahead a slide. But part of the reason we focus on this is a question we do get periodically, sometimes in these forum, and then sometimes in we get contacted by tribes. So I think the biggest barrier, to be frank, and we're having a 1 o'clock session on budget, is EPA's budget remains very static in terms of our Tribal Cleaner Act appropriation. And so because of the resource intensive nature of regulatory monitoring, it does require a lot of additional resources that haven't generally been available. But again, just this is a question that we get a lot. And so I wanted to just be very upfront about it in case there's further questions. So next slide. So I just came from the 10 a.m. session on wildfire response, and maybe some of you did as well. But for those of you who didn't, I wanted to make sure you were aware of some of the work that EPA is doing and others on related to wildfire. So for some tribes who have tribal land or in non-attainment areas, you have kind of routine ozone and particulate matter impacts. But for many more rural areas or areas across the rest of our region, wildfire smoke is by far the number one public health concern. We don't really regulate it the same way because they're not industrial sources or they're not motor vehicles. It's natural and to some extent. I mean, obviously, it's exacerbated by anthropogenic climate change. We're having drier, hotter years, and that is directly contributing to the increased wildfire in the last wildfire smoke in the last few years. One of the things we do is we really want to help the public be educated on things they can do to reduce their exposure to wildfire smoke. So we have what's called the Smoke Ready Toolbox for wildfires, and there's a web link for that. So some of it is just knowing about what is your air quality so you can make better decisions. For example, one of the decisions that I have to make, I coach soccer, and I'm very careful not to have practices with my 12-year-olds when there's wildfire smoke or above a certain level. So one of the things EPA does is help provide the tools to make those individual decisions or league-wide decisions or school decisions or larger community decisions. You can also, in your tribal communities, we've worked with tribes to, for example, develop things like clean rooms or information on clean rooms, so that when wildfire smoke is high, how do people reduce their exposure by getting out of the situation? So and so there's a lot of resources on EPA's website for things like that. We also put together fact sheets, that kind of go into more detail about this type of thing. So next slide, please. One of the things that I think we're very proud of is we've been working with the Hepa tribe, Hepa Valley tribe, to do indoor air research related to wildfires, but also prescribed fires and other wood smoke. As some of you saw at the 10 o'clock session, wood smoke can come from many things, not just wildfires. It can come from some rural areas, especially have wood as their sole source of heating, and either for heating or for, say, wood stoves can be a huge source of exposure for people. So this is a research project that we have presented before, but this actually has results on the slide. So I was very excited to be able to show it today. One of the things we're doing is we're looking at indoor and outdoor air. This is what's called purple air sensors. So it's a low cost sensor. We don't endorse any particular sensor, but this is really, frankly, the most common. And so this is a PM 2.5 sensor, and it gives real-time values of particulate matter. You can have it both outdoor and indoor, and that's what this is showing. So outdoor is on my screen, it's like a cyan color. I guess it's a bluish color. And thank you, Eddie is actually doing the what I would be normally doing of waving my hands at the screen. So thank you, Eddie, with the cursor. So that is the outdoor values for PM 2.5 in this case from wildfire. And then it actually shows the indoor air quality, which generally tracks outdoor air quality, as most of you know. Outdoor wood smoke can easily get inside. Housing stock is not generally, impervious to outdoor air. I guess it depends on the quality of the housing stock, and certainly this is worse in areas that are environmental justice areas. But this shows the effect of installing the Hepa filter in an indoor air setting. And what you can see is it's a little tiny, so I apologize for that, but the 24-hour standard is 35 micrograms per meter cube. So you're seeing values that are much higher than that. These are 10-minute values, not 24-hour, but you're seeing values that are much higher than 35. But if you get indoors and you have a HEPA filter, it can really get to what we consider to be safer levels of PM 2.5. So again, this is showing the benefits of proper air filtration in our schools and homes and other locations. So thank you, Eddie. Next slide. So let's see, it's 11:30. So there's only 20 minutes left in the session. So, but I'm wrapping up. I want to have at least 10 minutes left for questions at the end as well. But again, if anything pops up and you want to put it in the chat, I'll pause on that as well. So indoor air quality, I mentioned this is a big part of our program. This is what we consider one of our non-regulatory programs, but it's a chance to really impact public health. I mentioned this already, but people spend over 90% of their time indoors, and sometimes indoor air quality can be worse than outside. You can actually have indoor sources. For example, I already mentioned wood smoke if you have it as a source of heating or cooking, but even gas stoves can give off formaldehydes or other pollutants, and you can have higher toxic pollutants indoors than outdoors in some cases. In some cases, it is transport from outdoor air to indoors. So wood smoke is a good example from wildfires. So one of the things we do is we really partner with tribal agencies to develop indoor air programs to help to help increase awareness, reduce exposure about indoor air quality concerns. And so that was a very poorly constructed sentence. But anyway, so we do work through our tribal air grants and the GAP program to help build tribal indoor air quality programs, and then provide technical assistance for those programs. We're also always trying to put out resources online or give talks and record those as a resource. So there are a few links here. Hopefully we'll be able to share this presentation so you can get those, but you can always get those by emailing, especially Eddie or Kate as our tribal air coordinators, and they can get you more information on this. So we do webinars on indoor air pollution. We have actually put out a video recently about protecting family mental health during wildfires. Obviously very important, especially with the links to COVID as well. So in general, we are always trying to kind of raise awareness, but also provide educational opportunities. We are working with ITEP. I already mentioned ITEP to make trainings available on addressing indoor air impacts from wildfire smoke. And if you'd like to learn more, I put all of these email address on this slide. So please encourage you to email Ali, and she can get you in touch with additional resources. And thank you. Eddie actually put his email in the chat as well if you need links or to the presentation. Okay, next slide. And then I guess finally I'm finishing up with grants and then consultation. So I'm going to run out of time. I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. Most of you are aware we do have currently have 30 tribal air grants that we give in Region 9 for $3 million. So not a lot, but hopefully useful. In general, I already mentioned about building tribal air quality management capacity. I'm not going to mention it much here, but I think some of you are familiar with what's called treatment in a manner similar to state. As a state, it's TAS, sometimes we call it. So one of the things I just want to highlight, I don't want to miss it if I'm moving on quickly, is we did celebrate, Deborah Jordan mentioned on, sorry, I'm running it Tuesday, I guess it's yesterday, that recently La Posta got awarded TAS, and we were celebrating that yesterday. So, but in the past, since we last met, both Morongo and La Posta have EPA approved TAS applications under the Clean Air Act. So just always want to take a chance to acknowledge that before moving on. So, but next slide. I do want to highlight this and not brush over it because it is new. So some of you are familiar with the American Rescue Plan that was passed by Congress. There actually is $100 million that was given to EPA under the American Rescue Plan. $50 million of that was specifically to advance environmental justice concerns. I'm going to be talking about the air quality part. So I'm going to be talking about the other $50 million, which is for air quality monitoring. So it has several components. Some of you know this already from national webinars, but I just want to highlight that there is going to be a grant competition. It's not open yet. It'll be opening soon. So people can, thank you, Cindy, for congratulating Rongo and LaPosta. I wanted to amplify that. So that's great. Thanks for putting that in the chat. I wanted to make sure people are aware that there will be a request for applications coming out for the $20 million grant competition. Obviously, tribes and tribal groups are welcome to apply to that. That will be in the next month or so, as far as I'm aware. We are also going to be giving direct awards to existing grantees. That's the $22.5 million, mostly for monitoring. And tribes are eligible for that, tribes that currently do monitoring. So we'll have contacts at the end if you weren't already aware of this. We have been doing outreach. And then there is $5 million that was given to EPA regions to do mobile monitoring. So we're not going to have a lot of capacity to do mobile monitoring in Region 9, but we are partnering with Region 10, which is the Seattle office, in the Northwest United States. In case that capacity is needed, there could be some opportunities for that. So next slide. Another thing that is readily available that most of you know about from past years is the Diesel Emissions Reduction Act grants, DERA. Since I'm skipping over this a little bit, I'm just gonna highlight that there is a breakout session for those interested in DERA. It's at 3 o'clock today. And please encourage you to go to that. Under DERA, there are several different programs. There are certainly competitive grants and then direct grants for tribal and insular areas. Think of it as territories. And then there also are school bus rebates, and under the current infrastructure bills, which have not passed, the bipartisan infrastructure bills, there are potential increases in school bus rebate and other school DERA grant programs. There are some very large numbers that are being talked about, but it's still not passed. So I'm gonna gloss over it in this slide, but please encourage you to go to 3 o'clock if you're more interested. The final two slides I'm gonna cover, the next slide, Eddie, is on grant flexibilities. So obviously, we just want to acknowledge that the pandemic has impacted all of us, but some more than others have been impacted. Of course, we want to be available to you to provide resources. Just encourage you to reach out to our staff if you're experiencing challenges, say for example with your grants or your grant commitments. Reach out to Eddie and Kate or others. We have other grants staff who work with you. Here's a resource for in times of COVID-19. Here's a FAQ, frequently asked questions for grants. It's on this slide. And again, Eddie has put his email address in the chat if you want to reach out directly. And then the final thing I want to talk about, I'm skipping to it so that we give it fair time because it is really important to us, is the next slide, Eddie, is on consultation. I mentioned this at the beginning, but really to address concerns that were raised to us, we took a close look. We really reevaluated our processes for consultation. I think we've improved it. We're always open to additional feedback, of course. We started soliciting input from all of you a couple of years ago. We had multiple listening sessions and updates starting in about September 2019 and continuing for the last 2 years, all the way through this year. We did put together a best practices document, which we finalized on August 22nd of this year, 2021. Here are 5 key areas in that best practices document. And, I really wanted to verbally go through those, as a further commitment to following those best practices. The communication section is really focused on our notifications to tribes really need to be clearly identify potential impacts, and they really need to be written in a manner that's easily understood. Just recognizing that there's a broad range of expertise. Some tribes have a ton of air quality expertise and others don't. And it's really important for us to be working with all of them in a way that's very clear. It's also, I mentioned this already in the permit section, but it applies to all of our rulemaking actions, that we really need to be providing earlier notice of our rulemakings. That's the advance notice bullet. The communication with EPA headquarters, that's really a commitment on our part that we as Region 9 need to be working more effectively with our headquarters offices on tribal issues. So again, it's early communication, but clear communication and a real commitment to do so. For training, there's a commitment that EPA staff should receive additional training on working with tribes. All EPA staff already do receive training working with tribes, but clearly we need to do better and we need to do more. And so that's included in the document. And then finally, the best practices is really, again, we should be actively working to develop best practices for consultation on rulemakings, and then use them consistently. I think that's the key. I think we have done things in the past, but I think we need to really be clear about what the best practices are, and then use those consistently. So again, I just want to point that we do have a version available that people can see in terms of our best practices, and many of you on the call have seen that and have provided comment, and we really appreciate that. So with that, I am down to my last 7 minutes and 22 seconds, according to the session up above. So just want to encourage people. Here's the resources we've mentioned in terms of EPA staff to contact. I will open it up now if anyone wants to put anything else in the chat. I can probably go back and look and see with the conversation that Lisa had, but if there's anything else you'd like on the permit side, please continue to bring that up as well. I'm so thankful Lisa's here, because I know I would botch that.
Matt, this is, well, I'll come back on.
Okay, Stephanie, yes.
Hi. So the other part is we had to go pretty quickly over the budget part, but there also is a whole panel of all the division directors this afternoon that Cindy and Lisa Gober have put a lot of effort into arranging, so that if you want to hear more about the funding side for all the divisions, that's at 1 today. So
1 o'clock California time. We should clarify. Sorry.
Oh, asking for the contact slide back. Oh, and grant funding. So that, wow, we were thinking the same thing, Cindy. So
yeah, that's great.
Anything specific?
Well,
maybe, yeah. Do you want me just to speak a little bit about?
Yeah, why don't you? Yeah,
okay.
We can do a little bit of a preview, because Cindy, thank you so much for all your efforts to put together that session. And obviously we have some slides to go through that session as well. But if Stephanie, you want to give a little bit of.
Yeah, so so specifically just about the Clean Air Act funding for tribes, as probably some of you who've been involved in this a long time know, and as Matt said, it's been a rather a very flat. Yeah, go ahead.
Stephanie, can I interrupt you? Because
Sure.
Eddie can't see the chat. And so Eddie, can you, while Stephanie's talking, can you put the contacts back up? There's a request for that. Sorry,
Okay,
Stephanie. Please go
no
ahead.
problem. So funding for Clean Air Act funding for tribes has remained relatively, well, quite static, as Matt said. Over the years, we get around $3 million from headquarters, and that it does turn out that's about a little close to 25% of the national pot, and we get that based on a allocation framework that. There are a number of factors that go into that, but because of our number of tribes and the air quality issues here in Region 9, we do get a larger share than other regions, but it's still not enough. So every year we have much more demand than we actually have funds. And that is something that we all have been working on, doing our best to get information to headquarters and Congress about the need, but it has remained static. Going forward, there's a president in the president's budget. There is a possible increase for tribal funding, and we'll see how that plays out. We still don't have our budget for FY22. We're on what's called a continuing resolution, but we are hopeful that we'll get more funding and can bring more tribes on as air grantees. So, okay, and also it says you can yes, so you can leave it to the budget session, but that's kind of a little more specifics. And in past years, like 10 years ago, it was really Clean Air Act funding that we were talking about. But now when we're talking about funding that tribes can use for air issues, there's more funding in DERA. So that's one thing, and that can involve things like school bus rebates and all that. And then there's this American Rescue Plan money that Matt mentioned, And then also this afternoon, there is speculation that, that if the infrastructure bill goes through, that there will be funds available for it's actually, a lot of it is kind of more like DERA-like projects, but that's also a possible source of funding for tribes. So there are more ways to access money. There also was that VW settlement that was a lot of money that I think will be spoken about at one of the sessions here. But so that's what I know about, that's what I can say about funding in a quick session. And we only have 2.5 minutes, so I will stop there. Anything else anyone wants to?
I see Delbert asked if EPA provide the Method 9 training, which Lisa tells me is an opacity reading training, which is great. Again, I love what Lisa's on. So we'll take that, Delbert. I think the answer is probably yes, but let's, oh, we don't. Okay, Lisa's responding. We're going to let Lisa respond in the chat. So I have a separate, Lisa's letting me know. So she's going to respond in the chat, Delbert, to that one as well. Thank you. Okay. So we have 1 minute left, and certainly any of you are welcome to email me or Eddie or Kate or Stephanie or anyone else if you have follow-up as well. Okay, so I think I'm just going to hang out for, thank you, Lisa, for responding. I think I'm just going to hang out until the session ends, but I just wanted to thank you all for attending, and I can't wait for this to be in person again so that we can have a little bit more natural interaction. But I do appreciate the activity in the chat, and I appreciate the great questions, and hopefully I'll be talking to most of you again in some other way soon. Thank you.
Thanks, you guys. Kind of funny, the countdown. So, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What happens at 0?
Have a good day.
Okay.
Bye.
Okay, bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Do quick stop.